And welcome, Ms. Lillian Karuri Magero.
Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. MC, and thank you very much to the delegates and to the organizers of the conference for having me. I really enjoy being back in Durban. This is truly the land of milk and curry, and I'm looking forward to some nice curries in the course of the next day or two while I'm here. Early this morning when I was leaving my home to head out to Durban to join you, I woke up my little boy, he's 6, and I had promised I would wake him up before I go. And I reminded him that I was leaving, and he said, where are you going again? And I said, I'm going to a procurement conference. He said, what is a procurement conference? And I said, well, it's a group of very good-looking people who spend other people's money, and they spend lots of it, but they just do it better than the people can themselves, the people who actually have the money. And he said, oh, that's really good. I think I want to be in procurement also. So that actually really put a smile on my face and really got me excited to be here today. I also think that one of the things that really energized me in getting ready to be here was the theme of this conference, Navigating the Future. And I heard that the kickoff of the conference was quite effervescent. It was really apparently something that was quite to behold, and I'm sorry that I missed that. But I do think that it is such an important theme for a number of reasons. If you watch CNN, you have CNN in Durban, right? I know it's like another country here. So Cape Town's another country. If you've been following CNN, I think early this week or maybe late last week, they've been covering an iconic movie of the 80s. And I was very young. I'm 16, as you know, so I wasn't alive back then. But from some of your hairlines, I think you were around in the 80s. There was an iconic movie by the name Back to the Future. Does anyone remember that one? Yeah, the old people do. And what I hear is that the movie is themed around this young and very good-looking person. They must have been in procurement. Very good-looking person who's stuck in the future, and he's trying to make it back into the present in some kind of way. And I think in the course of the movie, I think he does make it back into the present, but one of the benefits that he brings back is that he's had a glimpse into the future, and he's able to leverage the lessons that he's learned in the future to bring back into the present. I thought that was pretty cool. Then CNN has been following that anniversary of Back to the Future and talking about how many of the predictions from Back to the Future actually came into reality from 30-something odd years ago. And some of the things have come to pass, which 30 years ago were considered to be very futuristic. A cell phone the size of your hand, Skype. So in the movie, they sort of have a theme around people sort of talking on a big screen, which didn't exist back then, which today is pretty much what Skype is. Telepresence. So a number of really what was considered iconic sort of futuristic themes have come to pass in the present today. Why am I talking about that? Because I think the theme actually is sort of tempting, encouraging, refocusing how we're looking at our profession and asking you to take a glimpse into what the future could or should be and leveraging that in the present so that we navigate to an outcome that is better for all of us, better for the profession, better for the industries that we represent. And I think that's really important. If I think about, as I was being introduced, my background is procurement and supply chain, but it was a little bit of an accidental career. And when I think about, I don't think I could have used the word navigating the future at any point in my early points of my career. It was a very messy and untidy career. It looked a little bit like watching the semi-finals of rugby. So there was no specific, it was sort of got tired in the first half and, no tries, and sometimes you're doing something, you're trying other things, and then you sort of burn out in the second half. No laughter there. I can see that it might be too early to make rugby jokes about the box. But now with the benefit of time, so this is the future that I didn't envision 16, 17 years ago, I did some things really well, accidentally, and did some bad things on purpose, and somehow navigated myself to what I still think is a decent career that can still get better if I navigate properly into the future. core foundational skills in procurement and supply chain: strategic sourcing, sound business knowledge, basic understanding of financial accounting, good legal sensibility, forecasting, planning, project management, all really good foundational skills. But one of the ones that I probably underestimated, didn't understand, was sort of accidental as I've come along the way, is stakeholder management. And if you ask me now how I am thinking about navigating into the future, a big part of that is developing that muscle around stakeholder management. And that's what I'm going to chat a little bit about today. It's not a sort of a highly technical theme, so it's really more so what my thoughts are and my perceptions in the course of my career in procurement supply chain the last 16, 17 years. But I absolutely welcome you to share what you might have in terms of insight and why you think this might also be important in the organizations that you serve. As I was being introduced, you may have noticed, even though I'm speaking to a procurement and supply chain theme, my current role in the organization that I work for isn't in that. And that's why I also think I think I offer a level of credibility around this theme, because coming from a procurement supply chain function, my organization saw a skill that I'm still, I think, developing and honing: managing stakeholders, driving outcomes, and perceiving that as being an opportunity to leverage the organization's strength by utilizing that skill that I bring to the table, and which for me is something I'm still working on and growing. So let's talk about that. Technology's never been one of my fortes. Am I doing this right? Will something blow up if I press this? Nothing's happening? Okay, so while we're fixing that, let me maybe as a starting point talk to a book that for years I've had on my shelf that I just hadn't had a chance to reading up until a few months ago. I have lots of problems here. The book is simply titled Steve Jobs, and it is the authorized biography of the iconic co-founder of Apple. And how many people are Apple people here? So Durban isn't Apple land, okay. There's one guy at the back who's an Apple person. 2, 1, 3, okay. I'm not an Apple person myself. I do have an iPad, but I do find it quite complex. I'm a Samsung person. But nevertheless, I think most of you know at least some of the story around Steve Jobs, and I highly recommend the book if you're really intrigued around the relentless pursuit of excellence, because it's really about that. When you look past the flaws of Steve Jobs as a man, I think that there's really an important story there. Around chapter 27, the author, Isaacson, describes the relationship between Jobs and Tim Cook. And in the story, Tim Cook at the time was the chief procurement officer at Apple. And in the narrative, Steve describes Tim Cook in 3 very simple words. He says, he gets it. This guy gets it. And then he says incredulously, and he comes from procurement. So to me, it's almost like he thought, if I thought someone was going to get it, I didn't think it would be the guy from procurement. In the brief narrative, then, Jobs describes the relationship between himself and Tim Cook and why he thinks that Tim gets it. He goes on to say, it's as if he knew and understands everything that I want and what I'm trying to do, and he wants the same thing. He's operating and he's engaged better and deeper than many of my other officers in this company. He is a depth and width in terms of his business acumen, driven primarily from his commercial background. He's responsible for the procurement and the supply of parts, components, and services in this organization, which is so integral to us being able to get to market quickly, to convert ideas faster and efficiently. But he wants it at the speed, and he understands the urgency of now that I have as a leader trying to drive this organization. He enters into a conversation and he can meaningfully engage, whether it's in agreement or providing, good, decent pushback to an idea that I have, to a way that really caught Steve's attention and interest. I grew really fascinated with the Tim Cook story because up until that point, I didn't know any other Fortune 100 company in the world that eventually progressed a person from procurement to become the CEO of the company. And not just any company, but the most valuable company in the world. Now, of course, there are many qualities of Tim Cook that I think made him the right candidate for that job, but there's one in particular that I think is so key and so important, and is the topic that I've been invited to talk about, and that's that he got it. That was around how he was able to understand the priorities of the organization and manage the relationships that needed to be attended to be able to make a meaningful impact on that. It offers what I think is a highly credible example of understanding, managing the priorities and the stakeholders of an organization so that you're impactful and you're influential. So how do we draw parallel to strategic sourcing skills? So even without taking a poll, if there's anyone in this room who's responsible for strategic sourcing or procurement or supply chain in any way, I suspect we're measured on the same things, even without asking. It's primarily your demand management, it's your savings, it's how you develop requirements and you write RFPs and RFQs, etc., how you do negotiations, etc., etc. I wouldn't even have to be in your organization to know that. I don't think my presentation is progressing. Is it? It did. Sorry. So assuming that those are the right things to be measured on, then what do your stakeholders think about you? If they're measuring you on those things, and let's assume you're performing on them, then wouldn't it then beg to pass that you're able to establish that you get it? Yet, for some reason, we still struggle for credibility in many of the organizations that we serve, and by that I'm not suggesting that we're not important or key, but we're not being necessarily perceived as getting it, as being integral, as being able to manage the right priorities and the right relationships. Now, this is not about being popular, it's about whether the stakeholders that we work with and that we manage think and believe that we understand them and we understand what's important to them. Clearly, there's still a disconnect. And that's a problem because the seat that we have fought for so long and so hard to get at the big table then might be threatened if we're not really equipped to navigate the future to keep that seat by being considered to being very key to the organization's priorities. I think that missing key is our stakeholder skills, how we manage stakeholders within and without the organization. In principle and on the surface, stakeholder management sounds like it's a bit of a fluffy word, like it's not that hard to do. I think most organizations, I've perceived what I think is actually quite interesting. People think that procurement is something anybody can do. Everybody thinks they know how to do that. They also think everybody thinks they know how to do marketing, and you can just step in and everybody knows how to do that. It should be very easy. A recent study that I read by Corporate Executive Board estimated that out of an average of 25% opportunity for unsourced projects, the actual savings that was actually realized by what considered themselves to be a mature sourcing team was only really about 11%. Claiming 25, achieving only around 11 in reality. 8% of that is being lost in clients who just are disengaged, or not participating, or just not compliant. Thank you. 11% is a lot. Sorry, I think there's something wrong with this machine. And where did that information come from? In a 2014 Deloitte study of CPOs around the world is where that information came from. So let me take you back again to where I think that we're missing a trick and where I think there might be a real opportunity, and I want to engage you on some thoughts around how we could do better. And that is around stakeholder engagement. If we're being measured on what matters, yes, but we're still not hitting the right mark, then procurement organizations that ignore those internal relationship skills, being able to influence, being able to gauge the importance of key priorities in the organization, is an area that we need to focus on. And without those right skills and approach to stakeholder engagement, procurement will continue to miss those valuable opportunities. I think that procurement functions and teams must learn how to sell ideas internally and externally to be able to influence and gain the support and progressive inclusion in the organization. It's like the old adage that says, to be a really good buyer, you have to be a terrific seller as well. For me, stakeholder engagement is so key. I would almost encourage you to think about it as if you went to a restaurant, you wouldn't just gauge the quality of the restaurant based on only the food, but also on the quality of the service, and that's that missing key. If we're not becoming a voice in the early stages of ideas in an organization, in the early progress of a project, then the opportunity to influence the path of a project will become even more limited over time. If the end users aren't on board when a sourcing initiative is being developed at the beginning, then why would they want to listen to you when you want to change a strategy or you want to change a supplier? A strong and credible procurement specialist has to raise their game at the earliest opportunity, and stakeholders are looking for people who are leaders and are partners to be able to really engage with them deeply around the priorities of the organization. If we allow ourselves to be paper pushers, then that's what we get. But if we use our powers of persuasion and influence correctly and competently, we will be seen as true leaders and true partners. And if we get it right from the start, we have a chance to really change and shape the organizations that we work in. Now, I don't think it's a skill that professionals lack in general. I actually think that skill innately lies within most people, probably even just inherently. But I think the real issue is most organizations don't see it as being important for procurement professionals, and as a result, don't nurture it and don't train it. Client-facing teams get lots of opportunity to develop stakeholder management skills, so you'll find marketing functions, sales functions are reinforced in this skill. They receive a lot of training budget for that, but we don't. My observation has been, even in our recruitment processes around recruiting procurement professionals, technical skills are evaluated, training in specific procurement topics are evaluated, but stakeholder management is not being evaluated or considered, at least not deeply enough, is my impression. I don't think that it's easy, and I don't think it should be considered to be soft. I actually think these are hard skills, because as you learn them, your attitude will change, how you turn up changes, and how you negotiate and engage also changes. And if you have a heritage within your organization of employing slightly more technical skills and not investing in those soft skills or that strategic management skill, then you're going to have a population of procurement people who aren't really equipped with world-class skills. But I think we can get it. And I think we need it, because it will help our teams inherently build long-term relationships within the organization, build confidence within the professionals on how to use their personality to influence situations easier and faster, how to deal with difficult customers and suppliers, how to intuitively evaluate situations faster and adapt an approach or a repertoire to suit what the situation actually needs. I think this is very much learnable. So let me give you key principles which I think help us get it. 1, get to know your stakeholders. 2, engage as early as possible. 3, get into the detail. 4, communicate, and communicate again. 5, use policy as a carrot, not as a stick. 6, create communities. And number 7, and lastly, plan, measure, and manage for success. Let me talk you quickly through those. The first principle around getting to know your stakeholders. The key idea here is to develop a comprehensive understanding of who your stakeholders are in the first place. And I know this sounds pretty basic, but you'd be surprised at how varied the interpretations of who your stakeholders are within your own organization or within your own teams. And it can get even a little bit more complex when you ask your teams, not only who are your stakeholders, but what are they about? What's important to them? What are they being measured on? What is their interpretation of success? Many sourcing teams think about who their stakeholders are in a very flat and almost horizontal manner. But a seasoned sourcing professional should be able to think about who your stakeholders are, both horizontally and vertically, making a scan. By vertical, who is in charge, and horizontal, who are the people who influence. And by understanding those two realms, understanding then how to plug in and what you need to do to make the relationship work even better. As part of the pack that I've left with the conference organizers, I've offered a number of toolkits. I'm going to offer a number of toolkits around stakeholder mapping, which I encourage you to utilize unless you have something already that you use in your organizations, around how to map your stakeholders and then how to engage with them effectively. The one on the screen is just but one example. This particular example on the screen maps both the vertical and the horizontal relationships and tiers them based on the engagement that is required for each of those constituents. Once the individual stakeholders have been identified, then I think a seasoned stakeholder strategy will prioritize by degree of influence what attitudes are coming through from each of those various stakeholders, how you need to engage them, why, how often, etc. Principle 2 is engage as early as possible. The time to engage with stakeholders is when the ideas are twinkling in somebody's eye. That's the right time to engage, at the ideation phase. Most of the time, when you engage much later in the cycle of a project or an initiative, then that means that you're not considered to be pivotal at the development of what that initiative needs to be. I'm struck by a story in the 70s when then President JFK, John F. Kennedy, was visiting Cape Canaveral, which is the space station where they would launch spaceships into space. And at the time, it was the space race was the big thing. And as JFK was touring the facility, he came across a cleaner who was cleaning one of the sidewalks. And he introduced himself and said, "Hello, my name is President Kennedy, and what's your name?" And the person said, "I don't know the guy's name, maybe he says his name is Chris." And President Kennedy asked him, "What do you do here?" And he says, "I'm helping launch spaceships into space." That to me says a deep sense of no matter what you are doing in the organization, I have a sense of what the outcome is, and I'm deeply involved in that. And you're so deeply involved that you understand the entire construct of what's happening in the organization and what's important about it. Encourage your teams to request not just a strategy of what they are sourcing, but what the overall strategy is for the organization, the strategy for the company. If your team doesn't know what the strategy of the company is, then they don't know how to interpret it to what they're doing on a daily basis. Principle 3, get into the detail. I, up until recently, was responsible for sourcing in a specific part of our bank, ABSA. And one of the things that really struck me was to really add value to the constituents that you do business with, you have to speak their language. Be prepared to speak their language, not yours. So that means not using procurement jargon, understanding how they speak about in their business, what's important in their business, and almost exist in their business. Principle 4, communicate, communicate. One of the key themes to really being well connected with an organization that you're an enabler for is be clear what initiatives you're working on, understand what initiatives they're working on, communicate backwards and forwards, going beyond the traditional methods. Some of the things that I've seen that I think are really impactful is beyond just the regular newsletters that say what you're doing is tailored e-newsletters, pushing information out via SMS, pop-up messages on screen, app stores that really engage you with your client in the nouveau ways of communicating in the digital age. Procurement professionals love the Procurement Bible, pulling out the rule book. Not a good way to engage with stakeholders. Use the policy as a carrot, not a stick. Many sourcing teams resort to the policy because they failed to have secure stakeholder engagement and buy-in and participation. So they default to because the rule says so. When you're strong in engaging with your clients, you probably never even have to bring up the policy. Rather, engage in the realm where understand what you're doing within a business, and I find ways to make sure you're working in the confines of the policy, and we revise the policy whenever needed to make sure that the policy is an enabler to the business, not a disabler to the business. Creating communities, This is very similar to the communication realm that I mentioned earlier. Create an ecosystem where there's constant exchange of best practice, encouraging collaboration, reinforcing shared outcomes, requesting opportunities for your stakeholders to come into your environment and you into theirs. In the course of last year, I took a team to go and visit a cash center when I was managing a cash business within the bank. And it really opened the eyes of not only myself, but my team around elements of the contract that we're negotiating, because you actually begin to see people carrying cash and you see the dangers and you see the loops and you see areas of opportunity for how you are actually building a contract. So going into your stakeholder environment, understanding the environment deeply is a good way to actually impact your teams in the way they're thinking about their stakeholders, contracting for them and buying for them. And then last but not least, planning and measuring and managing success. Beginning with clear objectives and targets, tracking benefits, sharing in benefits, how benefits are being earned. So if cost containment is one of the measures in which you're being measured, make sure that the success in cost containment is shared with your stakeholders as well. Investing in putting somebody in your client environment, I think, is as key as servicing them with buyers. Creating feedback channels and being transparent around feedback and honest around feedback. So many of these elements, whereas may not be necessarily earth-shattering or new information, I think if you really think about them deeply, I think it reinforces that it's not that easy to manage stakeholders. But if you're purposeful and deliberate around how you're doing that, it can really impact the positivity that in which procurement and supply chain teams are seen within their organization. I think it's really important to begin to evolve how strategic sourcing teams position themselves, not just as people delivering a service into the business, but actually you're selling a benefit, you're selling a relationship, you're selling an engagement. If you do it right, I think that there's tremendous opportunities, not only as an individual, but for the teams to learn, to be of better service to your organizations, and also to grow. And I believe I'm case in point of that. Again, when I was asked to speak on this topic, my sense is that stakeholder skills are not only going to be so key in the present as we continue to reinforce our seat at the table as strategic sourcing professionals, but I think going into the future, because now this profession is becoming more embedded in terms of we have appropriately trained people. It's now whether we have people who are appropriately engaged in the organizations that we're in. Thank you.